It's easier to imagine the end of the world than it is to imagine the end of capitalism, is a popular saying that every leftist has probably heard of. And for many of us, that is true, right? Like, I'm someone who has spoke about my vision for what a post-capitalist like nation state would look like. And I've spoke about my vision for like maybe like a communist Britain, but it's still kind of following the model of like maybe the Chinese system or the Cuban system, where it is a communist party managing a capitalist economy, because we live in a global capitalist economy. And for so many of us, despite how terrible the system is, we really just can't envision a world where this doesn't exist. So in that context, when we watch something like The Last of Us, as terrible as the world in that like game and that show is, we see like a literal communist civilization, I guess, and we see a communist independent community in Jackson, and there is something so seductive about that, that despite it only existing after the end of the world, we are still attracted to wanting to live there. And I want to speak about all of this today because I love The Last of Us, and I think today, when this video is going up, it's the finale tonight of part 2. I've actually been playing my third playthroughs of part 1 and part 2 while the show's been on, and I just finished part 2 last night, and I'd say I'd vastly prefer part 2, and it's one of my favourite games I think ever made. Like, I'm just obsessed with the actual game. And yeah, I love playing through it again, but something that's interesting is what we see of Jackson in the games versus the show is very different, and the show expands on it massively, giving us the actual context. It shows us like the workers' council, essentially. It shows us this direct democracy. And I want to talk about that today. And before anyone comments, because people love to do this when I bring up that I love The Last of Us, isn't The Last of Us just Israeli propaganda? Now, you're saying that to the person who was literally the first YouTuber to ever make a video discussing Israel and The Last of Us, and I'm still very proud of that video. I think it's very good, and I talk about how I feel about it. Is it Israeli propaganda? And I would say, if it is, it's poor Israeli propaganda, because in certain interpretations, the Israel side come out looking far worse than any other side. So I wouldn't say it's effective propaganda, but I do want to actually talk a little bit about that today, because the director of part 2, co-director of part 1, and one of the showrunners on the shows is Israeli, and he actually grew up in a revisionist Israeli settlement. And if you guys know your Israeli history and you know the socialist influence on the foundation of the state of Israel and like 1930s, 40s and 50s Zionist movements, you will know there's a big socialist element that actually directly influences the show, because Jackson is clearly, in my opinion, is based on a kibbutz settlement. Even Bernie Sanders actually has worked on a socialist kibbutz, and people say it might have even influenced his own socialist politics, like seeing socialism actually working in practice. Obviously, you know, when we look back at that from the 2025 context, we're like, yeah, it was a form of socialism, also based on like ethno-supremacy, right? And I'm not going to get into today, but there's a really interesting history about different Jewish socialist movements, ones that prioritize the Jewishness, ones that wanted like a multiracial socialist Palestine. It's very interesting, but I do just want to talk about it a little bit with its influence on The Last of Us world. So all of that coming up for you today. If you want to check out that video about The Last of Us in Israel, I recommend it. I still haven't seen many people cover this, and I think my video is actually the best breakdown. There is a viral like Vice article people always share, which I do actually read a little bit of in the video, but I think mine's far more comprehensive, and also it's got like an actual anti-Zionist talking about this as well, and trying to be fair in my assessment. Let's first establish what I'm sick of in society. Like, why am I attracted to this rural, communal, socialist living in the post-apocalypse, right? So I guess for everyone, really, we can all feel something's wrong. And, you know, that's a great quote in The Matrix, which is also expanded upon in Mr. Robot, that we know there's something wrong in the world. In the Matrix context, it's about, you know, being transgender. In the Mr. Robot context, it's about like literal capitalism. And everyone can feel it. We all hate it, really. I fundamentally believe 95% of us hate capitalism. We just can't articulate it. And what we're seeing right now with the 2020s dystopia is this push towards techno-feudalism, these tech bros just ruining our lives with social media, with AI, and the planet literally being destroyed by this economic system in the background while we watch stuff like what's happening in Gaza, which, in my opinion, pull back everything. The imperialism of that is generally accepted because of globalized capitalism, and no one stops it because of globalized capitalism. Because, let's say, in the Cold War period, you had two blocks that had fundamentally different ideologies, so you had them backing different groups. But for example, China isn't going to back the Palestinians because China profits so much of this global capitalist system. There is no economic incentive for it to actually go directly against groups like the United States and Israel, right? So we are watching the Palestinians be a sacrificial lamb for capitalism, as well as capitalism just being soul destroying. And in the American context as well, while people say like Chile is ground zero for neoliberalism, I think America is the best example of like neoliberalism taken to a real insane extent, where just so many Americans are forced to abandon community, forced to just like isolate themselves in the pursuit of this profit. And the system actually incentivizes people to do this, to actually enter the top, let's say, 10% of Americans. So with all of that in mind, I think loads of us, for various different reasons, are just super dissatisfied. And also we feel like we have no purpose in life. So, you know, obviously the term bullshit jobs is something we all understand. Like, corporate work is soul destroying. Corporate work is meaningless. And under capitalism, all you serve as is a cog in a machine to make rich people even richer. And you don't actually have time to pursue your passions, for one thing. But also, for a lot of us who don't work in things that help society, let's say like working for the NHS or doing actual good work for either charities or certain government programs, our life feels directionless and meaningless. And we live in an age of consumer capitalism where in the West, we're not struggling for material things. But you saw this peak in the 1990s in the culture with films like Fight Club, The Matrix, American Beauty. Even if your material needs are met under capitalism and you're doing actually okay, it's still soul destroying and pointless, right? So with all of that in mind, and you guys might relate in various different reasons, when you see something like The Last of Us and you see people working together, you see people have their role and their purpose, you think about, I want that. I want that as well. And it feels like increasingly that is never going to be achievable. So some of you might have clicked on this video and you might not actually know what even The Last of Us is. And I'm not going to spoil like character storylines and plot points, but I am going to talk about the context of some things in the games and the show. If you're super sensitive to spoilers and you've been putting off watching this or playing it, maybe don't watch this video. But I'm not going to spoil like endings of games. I'm not going to spoil like certain character trajectories. I'm going to talk about it more broadly, right? So in the world of The Last of Us, we have two different versions of it. So we have the show version and we have the game version. In the show version, the world ends in 2003. This is when this pandemic sweeps the globe. In the game, it ends in 2013, when the game actually released. And that means we have like two kind of different competing versions of the future. So season 1 of the show is set in 2023. Part 1 of the game is set in 2033. And then obviously part 2 is set in like 2037, 8 or whatever. And season 2 of the show is set in like 2028, 2029. So I only specify that because when you see certain things, which I do want to talk about, like the technology that they have access to, or even some of the social values, like homophobia, for example, is more of a thing in the shows than it is in the game, because that 10-year period of 2003 to 2013 is important in terms of the general acceptance of the LGBT rights, for example, in countries like America. And obviously we can't ignore that the technological difference in terms of the internet is so different, because I remember playing the game recently, Ellie and Riley are at a photo booth and they're trying to like upload a photo to Facebook. They don't know what Facebook is, right? But of course in 2003, there was nothing really like that. So with that, there is different context as well of what society loses if you have this apocalypse in either 2003 or 2013. And obviously it goes without saying, the world of The Last of Us is absolutely horrific. And for the most part, what you're shown in the show is absolutely terrible. And you have so many like little stories, and this is in the games as well. You find these stories and you're like, Jesus Christ. And playing through the games recently, like playing as Abby in certain sections, she reads like backstories and she's like, I'm so glad I didn't I wasn't alive during the outbreak. I'm so glad I was born afterwards, because this sounded just so horrific what people went through. And that is like a very good point. Like, for us who are kind of desiring to live in this world in some capacity, we're not thinking about living through the outbreak. We're thinking of transporting ourselves to 20 years after the outbreak, right? Where things have entered some sort of like relative normalcy, not like this just horrific period of time. And like Tess in season 1 talked about how her son and her partner were infected, and she killed her partner, but she couldn't kill her son. So she just left him as an infected who turns into like these monsters. And it's like, and the fear of these creatures, like these cordyceps zombies and stuff. Yeah, I don't want to live in that world, really, right? I don't actually want to live in the world of The Last of Us, because all of these things are overwhelmingly negative. Then you have certain groups like they're cannibals, they keep slaves, or even if they're not actually that bad, they might still just kill you, right? So it's just a very, very dangerous world you don't want to live in. So I want to get all of that out of the way, because yeah, I don't actually want to give up my pretty cushy life and go live in a world that has to deal with all these problems, right? But I'm talking about why this communal living in this environment is seductive, because what this horrific environment does do is it makes it apparent that humans have to work together. And it's something, especially in Western societies, we increasingly forget because of the brainwashing of neoliberal capitalism. We do not think we need each other. We don't think we have to work together. We don't think humanity is better off if we collectively work together. We are all trying to compete with each other and destroy each other so we can enter the high echelons of power where we can pay other people to do these sort of things, right? Rather than rely on each other for communal survival. And when you take all of the stuff away, you take the economic systems, you introduce this threat like this horrible pandemic which can turn people into like these savage monster animal stuff. Like, people then think about, well, we do have to work together. And that's what you see in pretty much every society shown in The Last of Us, right? So we see the fascist authoritarian side with Fedra, but even in Fedra, there is an element of collectivism because everyone has to work together in the society still, right? You have to do military service, you get assigned certain duties, like cleanup duties, you have to work in certain environments, but you're like forced to, right? There is no choice. But again, even in this structure, it's a collective one. And then we look at groups like in part 2, like the WLF, which I've said is an actual allegory for the IDF, but in that context as well, they have this massive stadium that they live in. And in this stadium, it's a collective society as well. You have your roles to play. You pretty much have to be in the military, but you can like raise the livestock, you can do the washing, you can peel potatoes. It is everyone working together. Like, there are teachers, there are children there. It is still a society that relies on collectivism, even when they're waging this pretty terrible war against another group of people, like the Seraphites. And the Seraphites are this fanatical religious cult. But again, it's still collectivism where everyone has their role to play. So in the world of The Last of Us, there just is no room, really, for much individualism. We only really see that with someone like Bill in season 1, who goes it alone because he was this crazy prepper before the pandemic, and he has a whole town to himself. But even he kind of gives in and obviously like has a partner by the end of it and starts making a few friends, like with Joel and Tess. So this existential threat forces everyone into a collective mindset, because that is how humans survive. And if you take it further down, that's how animals survive. Like, you don't find in a lot of animal societies that rely on like groups and packs and stuff, you don't get many of them like going off on their own and trying to survive, right? They stay together. And that includes our closest relatives, like different apes, like chimps, gorillas, bonobos, macaques. Like, these are all species that obviously can't invent things like neoliberalism and capitalism, so they work together for survival. But out of all of these societies shown in the game, Jackson is pretty much shown as the best place to live. Like, the creators of the show said this, and Joel and Tommy speak about this. They say, we like didn't even know how to live like this. We didn't know it could be better. But now look at us. And there's a really funny scene everyone loved where Tommy is giving Joel and Ellie the rundown of how things actually work. And because obviously they're products of the Cold War, they were raised in the Cold War, he's talking about how it's all collective ownership and stuff like that. And Joel says, well, that's communism, right? And obviously Tommy's response is like, nah, it's not communism. We hate communism. And then his wife's like, no, we are like literal communists. Like, that is what we are, and that is the governing ideology of this. And you see like this council, you see the direct democracy when they're voting for a certain thing in season 2 and stuff. So you're seeing this is governed by socialism. And just before we go a little bit further, I want to talk about this. So Bernie Sanders, of course, was more of a militant socialist when he was younger. It's pretty clear he's not one. But when he was running for president the first time, there was a lot of articles about something that he hasn't spoke about much, and I would love someone to ask him about it because it's clear it influences his Zionism still today. CNN writing, how did a socialist kibbutz influence Bernie Sanders? So a small collective community in northern Israel, modelled after the communist ideals of the Soviet Union, may hold clues to the development of US presidential candidate Bernie Sanders. He spent several months volunteering at an Israeli kibbutz in the 1960s. Been vague about the kibbutz. Mystery was solved last week when Haaretz dug up a 1990 interview of Sanders, and he claimed he spent several months in 1963 at one, which was a socialist kibbutz. One of the older guys who remembers him says, it was an explicitly communist society they had, and he said, we want to share everything. We think that you have to take care of the weak and the strong can deal with themselves, and workers from overseas help with fruit picking, and evenings were filled with community gatherings. So like I said, there is a long history of this type of stuff in the settlement of Palestinian territory, and this is relevant to The Last of Us because Neil Druckmann was actually born in a kibbutz in the West Bank, right? So that is occupied Palestine, of course, but he grew up in a revisionist settlement. So revisionist settlements are different from outwardly communist secular ones in that they are heavily religious. They actually have more of a strain of individualism in them as well, but they do have the baseline of collectivism baked in to these settlements because they're living, obviously, in an illegal settlement in a place that is obviously hostile to the existence of these settlements because they're literally stealing in other people's land. And in that, revisionist settlements are usually far more militant as well. And if you've seen a lot of settlers that are armed to the teeth, these are usually revisionist settlers. So Neil Druckmann grew up in one and he moved to America when he was 9 or 10 years old. So I think it's pretty clear, in my opinion, that influence is on The Last of Us, and Jackson is modelled after a socialist Israeli kibbutz, but also at the same time there are other obviously socialist communes that existed, and you could obviously invent this socialist commune in the context of The Last of Us world, but I think because of the director actually being from one of these types of communities in the first place, it's pretty clear there's a link actually there from Israel itself. Now, I said this when speaking about this after I played the second game. I love how everyone has a role to play in the society, but actually in the show they take it a step further and they actually show you this. Joel, he has his role. He's a carpenter. He's basically a soldier and he's a carpenter because we all know Joel is very good at killing. So he participates heavily in the patrols to make sure this community is safe. But also, he has a history of being a carpenter when he was younger. So he helps build the houses. So he contributes to the community and people love him. They love him because he plays this very, very essential role and his life has purpose. This is a guy who's done so many terrible things and has lived in terrible societies like the Fedra zone in Boston and stuff. And now he is given this new chance to actually have a life that is meaningful to loads of people. And we think about that in terms of ourselves. And I'll ask everyone watching this right now, if you lived in this society, what would you do? And how would you help? And that's such an interesting question because me and my girlfriend were talking about this. And I said I'd be a teacher. I would say I could obviously do the physical labor, I'm physically able, and I could help out with a lot of that stuff as well, and maybe even the patrols if I was brave enough. But I know what I would bring to that community is, even in the post-apocalypse, where we don't have access to libraries and technology, because of my education, I have such a good knowledge of things like history and politics and things like geography. I'd obviously be a teacher. That's what I'd be there for. And it's really nice to think you could go to that society. Obviously, you're all working together. You have this community. I'd have my role as a teacher. And what that would do is just give children this education and hopefully build for the future and grow this community to maybe something even larger. And you feel you're actually doing something. I'm not being paid to do it. There's nothing about competing with other people for salaries and shit like that. It's no, you'd be a good teacher because you have this knowledge and you've grown up in a large family and you've always had younger siblings and you've always been good with children and everything. So that would be your role. But then if someone is more has better knowledge, Joel also knows about electronics, so he brings that to the table and everyone brings something to the table and you all work together. And in essence, in this terrible world of The Last of Us, people have to come together. And if you have these more socialist ideals, you're going to live in harmony with each other, hopefully. There's obviously going to be conflict because we're humans, and we see that in things like the show, but you're going to work together for everyone to thrive as much as possible, right? And in our dystopian world now, that feels like it can never happen. Like I'm drawn to that because I feel like it can't happen, and I want that. And also tied into that, that's just like the socialist kind of roles in society. And maybe, like I said, I've spoke about a communist vision for Britain and stuff like that. So you can imagine people having these certain roles. But here's another thing: there's no consumer capitalism. There's no consumerism really anymore, because there can't be, because all the trade stuff and all of the global economy is done, right? And something I love about The Last of Us is when I play it and when I watch the show, people have their stuff. So Ellie has her bag, and you recognise it's Ellie's bag because she always has the same bag. Joel has his bag, and it's even got like duct tape on it, and it's all patched up, because you value things. Because you can't just go to the shop and buy something made in like a poorer country for really cheap and disposable. And I'm someone who like values my stuff, but I just love the thought of us all having to do this and actually value our property, repair our property, and be more intentional with everything. So this table right here, I bought this from a charity shop in 2015 in my second year of uni for £20. It's like a great wooden table, and it's like a computer desk as well. I used to use it for my computer and stuff. And I just really think it's great, and I don't need a new one. So I want to keep it for as long as possible. And that's just like what I'm like. I like keeping things. And this lamp here I really like. It came in a box smashed, and I repaired it with glue, and I felt good about doing that. I felt good about not being wasteful and consuming for the sake of it. A lot of my clothes, like I have this jacket I've been wearing since 2011, right? Because I hit 6'2" when I was 14. So it's like, it's always fit me, really. And I just like it. Like Joel has his jackets, Ellie has her jackets, they have their shoes. And you can't just go out and buy new things, so you value stuff so much more. And there's just something so nice about that. And even when I see like the PS3 consoles in Ellie's room in part 2, I'm like, yeah, like they have electricity, so in theory these games work, but you have to really take care of your things, and you have to know how to repair them, you have to be self-sufficient, and this mindless consumption has gone. But I also love how people kind of, even in their interests of like, they do collect things. Like Abby has her books, she has her coins, Ellie has her comics and these like playing cards, and they all like them. And it's just like such a nice, like intentional hobby where they really appreciate these things. Like in the Abbey section of The Last of Us 2, they're talking about like borrowing Harry Potter off each other and like reading like these classic books and talking about how great they are. And I'm just like, there's just something about it like that feels so alien now. And what is so strange is I'm old enough to remember kind of a world without this. Like when Ellie has her cassette tapes, I had cassette tapes growing up. My mum would record stuff on the radio that I'd like and make me these cassette tapes, and I'd have my Walkman and I'd really like it. I have my tape player, even when I got my car, I had a tape player as well. And there's just something about it. I can't really explain it. And maybe for a lot of people, you know, a lot of people watching this video, you could have been born in 2006, right? So like, you don't remember this world even existing. This world where technology and social media doesn't completely take over everyone's life. And I just feel like there was a point and this is another point as well, there was a point at technology where it didn't need to advance more. And I'd say that point was probably like, it literally could have been 2013 when The Last of Us happens, because we got to a point of like, okay, we have online interaction, but it's not like today. It's not like overwhelmingly brain rot, crazy shit taking over everything. We had our YouTube channels, we had online gaming, but it was just so different back then. It really was different. And I feel like technology's progression and what we're getting to now, it shouldn't happen, and it doesn't need to happen. And it's pointless. And that's again why The Last of Us is appealing. Say goodbye to social media. Say goodbye to the internet. Say goodbye to all those things. They're gone. Say goodbye to money. It's all gone. And it's all about your survival. And if you somehow lucked into this socialist commune, like, I don't think people can tell me that is not appealing to people. And yeah, I totally recognise the horrific shit. I totally recognise all this terrible stuff. But again, there's just something about that world, as a communist myself, as an anti-capitalist, that feels like it can only exist after the end of the world. Now, of course, I know there are actually lots of socialist communes around the world. I also know I would struggle living in a place like this. But I think just because neoliberal capitalism is so alienating, we're also isolated, we're also mind destroyed by technology. and we all don't feel a purpose in life, while the economic system literally destroys our planet and our souls. And that's why, like, we look to things like even the Last of Us context of like, that's all gone. And for some people, there's a better world. Like, there are some people in theory in the Last of Us who might like their life better after the apocalypse, right? And for loads of you watching this, you could probably think about like loads of different fiction which deals with the post-apocalypse. Like, look at Horizon Zero Dawn, that's set like 1,000 years after this like AI apocalypse, and you have all like these different societies, and maybe like that's appealing to you. But it's fair to say, capitalism, whether you can articulate it's capitalism or not, is the root of nearly all of our problem. And again, even the show showing people like Joel and Tommy, who ideologically might be more conservative, even they're having to admit, like, yeah, communism is the way. Like, communism is the way to survive. Communism is the way to do things. And to me, it's just like the end of the Cold War was like the worst thing that ever happened to humanity. And I'm not saying that because every communist system was perfect, because plenty of them were very flawed and way worse than others. But it's more like presenting a viable alternative. And the only reason the communist bloc was able to do that is because there were so many of them. So the US couldn't take over the world yet because these countries propped each other up. They helped each other. Like, the only reason Vietnam is communist today is because the Soviet Union, China and North Korea made sure they could keep fighting until they won, right? And that basically means communist revolution, whether that be in the Philippines, whether that be anywhere, it cannot succeed today because there is no block of alternatives. And even like with things like South Africa we're talking about recently, like Nelson Mandela said the Cubans fighting the apartheid South Africans just was such an inspiration to loads of people in South Africa to help change the system. And it's just like, for me, that's why it's so depressing, is we've moved past the stage of people viewing communism as a viable alternative, and neoliberal capitalism has just infected all of the world, like literally like a cordyceps fungus. And I just feel like now, as I said at the start, it is harder to see this communist society and this better world existing without the world itself actually ending. And that's the sad part. And that's why this type of thing will always be appealing, because as horrific as the Last of Us world is, our own world is horrific as well. And our own world is horrific, but all we can see in front of us is darkness, climate apocalypse, death. We don't see any hope. And I guess the silver lining, the bleakness of the Last of Us world, is there is a sliver of hope for the characters. There's a sliver of hope in terms of a society like Jackson. There's a sliver of hope for character arcs, what certain characters go through and what they could become in the future. And as depressing as that world is, there's hope things could get better. In our world, there is no hope that things get better. And even countries that do try and offer an alternative like system have to play by the rules of the dominant system at the moment, meaning everything they try and do gets subverted by the economic system, which inherently is anti-humanity. And I shared a quote from an Irish Marxist saying that basically capitalism is fundamentally not Irish because capitalism destroyed Ireland in terms of the famine, right? But I wish we just think about that generally in society. Like, capitalism is destroying us, and socialism is the answer, and collectivism is the answer, and everyone working together, not for profit, but for the goodness of humanity and to help each other. And we all have a role to play. And that's the beautiful thing about socialism, is it doesn't matter what you are. It doesn't matter your limitations. There is a role for you and you will be taken care of because we're all going to take care of each other. And yeah, I've been talking for a long time, but fundamentally, that is why the end of the world appeals to so many people, because we have no hope in the current state that things can get better and our lives can have meaning and we can actually, you know, have this community and respect each other and value each other. It's all about competing with each other for material good, numbing ourselves with brain rot and consumerism at the expense of our other humans. So that's it for the video, and I hope the finale is good tonight. And yeah, I'm going to make a few more Last of Us videos on my second channel, mainly about like what I want for part 3, which I wrote an article about. And I might talk about why I don't think season 2 of the show works as well as the game, because I think the tone is so different, and I don't think a lot of the changes make the show better. But that's it for the video. Let me know what you guys think in the comments, and if you made it this far, thank you for watching.